really hot summer temperatures hit your cotton assets pretty hard. Are you a climate change believer? And if so, are you worried about how it's going to impact on your Australian assets and your other agricultural assets around the world?
Absolutely, because we are now invested in 11 agri-commodities in terms of farming them or growing them across 20 different countries. So we have a fairly proprietary view on the impact of climate change in our upstream production and farming assets. And it is absolutely a reality that climate change is going to significantly impact agriculture. So it impacts it both from the nexus it has with water and the nexus it has with climate as well, microclimate as well. So it is probably the most important driver to future agricultural production, productivity, and therefore price.
And what's OLAM doing to future-proof itself against climate change?
So firstly, we do footprinting of how much carbon dioxide emissions we generate, how much bio-waste we generate, and how much water footprint we have. So for example, on the water side, we have established that our top tier 1 manufacturing facilities, the 55 facilities that we have, we consume about 4.6 million cubic meters of water. In our plantations and our farming operations, we consume about 350 million cubic meters of water. And in the supply chain from farmers and others who we buy these commodities, they use about 26.3 billion cubic meters of water. 90% of the water that we use on our farms and concessions, and about 98% of the water that our supply chain uses in their farming operations is rain-fed and not groundwater or aquifers from where we're drawing that water. So we have given a target that in our tier 1 manufacturing and processing facilities, we will reduce water usage per ton of product that we supply by 10% by 2015, and in our farms by 10% by 2020. Similarly, we have mapped the carbon dioxide emissions that we generate across all our commodities in each country, and we have said that we generate today about 2.1 million tons of carbon dioxide in scope 1 emissions, 0.6 million tons of carbon dioxide in scope 2 emissions, and about 20 million tons of carbon dioxide in scope 3 emissions. So again, we have put some hard targets of how we are going to reduce that carbon dioxide emission footprint for every ton that we supply by 2015 and 2020. So we will report every year how much carbon dioxide emission per ton have we reduced compared to the hard targets that we have set. The third thing that we are doing is through research. For example, we have tomato growing and tomato processing operations in the US and California. We are probably the third largest tomato paste manufacturer in the US. We are also in onion and garlic growing and dehydration. So if you take the example of onions need a lot of water in growing the onions, and it needs a lot of water when you dehydrate the onions. So over a 10-year project, we have, through breeding and better hybrid varieties, increased the solid content in the onions from roughly 9-10% to now 26-27%. So almost a 17% increase in solid content. Now that has meant that we saved 748 cubic meters of water per ton of onions that we source and we dehydrate, or we have saved about 65 million cubic meters of water. We have saved 7,500 hectares of land that we would have additionally needed if we didn't have the highest solid content. And cumulatively, we have saved $88 million in terms of costs. So this is one example of what we do. Another example, in our forest concessions, for example, in the Republic of Congo, in the Picunda region, we have created the first RED Plus project in Africa, the reduced emissions through deforestation and degradation, RED Plus. We set aside 96,000 hectares under this RED Plus program, where we will generate about 4.6 million voluntary carbon units over a 20-year period. So we are very focused. My view is that there's no point if I say I've generated $500 million of after-tax earnings, but I've depleted $200 million of natural capital from the environment. Because then I have to question myself, what is the point of all of this overwhelming effort if at the end of the day you've really depleted the natural capital and therefore left a huge bill to pay for future generations? So as I mentioned in my speech, if you see the episodes of extreme weather events in the last 10 years, which is in excess of 2,000 extreme weather events globally, compared to about 450, 470 weather events in the mid-70s, you will understand what the impact of climate change is. We're all saying now that we want to limit temperature growth in world temperatures, global warming by not more than 2 degrees centigrade, and carbon dioxide emissions in terms of parts per million of 450. But above 350, all the coral reefs will die. Above 1.5 degrees centigrade growth in temperature, all the coral reefs will die. 500 million people, 500 million people depend on those coral reefs for their livelihoods. So by accepting that we can increase carbon dioxide emission to 450 parts per million and increase world temperature, allow increase of world temperatures to 2 degrees centigrade, we have made an ethical choice that we are willing to live without coral reefs. And it also impacts a fourth of the fish population once you allow 450 million carbon dioxide parts per million carbon dioxide emission and are willing to accept a 2 degrees growth in temperature. But I believe we won't even reach 2 degrees. I think if we left unchecked, global temperatures, in my view, will grow by about 5 degrees centigrade, because we are going to emit another 55 gigatons of carbon dioxide between now and 2030, which means global temperatures will grow by 5 degrees, and that will be devastating.